Welcome everyone to my final video on assignment 7057, Writing About Writing 3. Okay, as you can see, we are in the BTW wiki. This is the assignment page for 7057. So I'm going to scroll right down to task number 3. So before this point, you should have already created a memo executive summary on lesson 7. You should have then also already created a memo in which you apply lesson 7 to your own writing in 7083. And now we are working on task 3, drafting a memo in which you discuss the challenges of guiding, research, and Grice's Maxims as they apply to creating a business letter. Now, since you have at this point should have already completed assignment 7083 just before this, in that assignment you wrote a generic business letter for the first time. So for this memo in task 3, I think it would be appropriate to use some of your evidence or supporting thoughts by referencing your own business letter from assignment 7083. Okay, so to get started, the first thing I need to do is research what these terms mean. So if you click on each, another wiki page will pop up explaining them. So I'm just going to go through those briefly, but you should definitely take your own time in reading the material and making up your own mind and how you would explain it in your own words. So first, the challenge of guiding. Basically what this means is so since we're talking about letters in this case, a document, or in this case a letter, if we are to overcome the challenge of guiding, we need to first gain our readers' attention or capture their interest, and then keep them motivated to keep reading. So unlike your composition essays, your reader in business writing doesn't have to keep reading your email or your memo or your letter. They can stop reading at any time if they feel that the content is not relevant to them, or is confusing, or is too difficult or to follow, any number of reasons. So it is even more important for us as writers in business to capture the interest of our readers and make sure that we keep them interested. And that can be challenging, right? Because as we're writing, of course, everything seems interesting to us because it's our own thoughts. But we have to think about what would keep our reader interested. And so for this first topic, in a single paragraph, you should answer the question of how do you keep your reader interested when you write a business letter? Okay, pretty straightforward. So next, the research challenge. If you click that link, this is the page that will pop up. Okay, so this sounds pretty self-explanatory. Basically, the research challenge is trying to gather information or knowledge that you currently don't have from primary and secondary sources, so that you can say the things that you need to say. So it may be information you need to learn about your audience or about your topic, or further source information. So this basically tells us that in order to complete a piece of writing, in this case a letter, you need to research different information. And so this is a place where talking about your letter report from assignment 7083 I think will really come in handy because you had to research primary and secondary research in order to complete that assignment. So in its own paragraph, you should talk about how 7083, or writing a business letter, or the business letter you've already written, contained a challenge of research in it, and how it was challenging to find the information you needed and how you overcome that. Okay. And again, you're welcome to use the letter that you wrote in 7083 as examples if it helps you make your observations more interesting. Okay, so this clearly wants you to focus a lot more on secondary research than primary, so make sure that you talk about the databases, the articles, the different kinds of research challenges you faced in gaining the information you needed from secondary sources. Okay, so that should be its own paragraph. Now it's time to figure out what Grice's maxims are. So if you click on this link here, this page will pop up. Let it load. Okay, so there are 4. And so this basically tells us different standards for quality writing. And so the first one is the maximum of quantity. Basically, our goal is to have the amount of information necessary to get our point across and no more. You shouldn't bog down your reader with a bunch of extra information they don't need. So selecting just enough information to sufficiently prove your point and not including anything extra. Then the maximum quality is making sure that anything you include you can say truthfully and that you have adequate evidence. So both of these kind of relate to our logos paragraph structure. So having your premises supported by sufficient evidence. So the first one says, prove it sufficiently, but then stop. The second one says, don't say anything you don't prove with evidence. And if you can prove it with evidence, it's clearly not false. The third maxim is about relation. So whatever content you include, make it relevant. So you could have done the first 2 fine, had a true claim that you supported with evidence, and you supported it with just enough evidence and not too much. But if that point and that information is not relevant to your reader, they're not going to be interested in what you wrote. So we need to choose our arguments based off of what is relevant to our reader and what they want. And then the final maxim is about method of expression. So avoid obscurity. So that would be like convoluted ways of expressing your ideas. Avoid ambiguity. So ambiguity would be when what you say could be interpreted in more than one way. Okay, so you want to make sure that your reader is able to read what you've written and interpret it the same way you do. Be brief. Don't go on and on and on. And be orderly. So don't continuously go back to old points and kind of mix things up, because that would be confusing and your reader would stop being interested in what you have to say. So all of those maxims are really helpful for keeping your reader engaged. And so this seems like a really good combination of concepts to put together. So once you understand those really well, your third paragraph should connect these maxims, all 4 of them, to you writing a business letter. And again, feel free to connect it to your letter report in 7083. And so you may need to answer this question for each of the maxims individually. Okay, so that's the basic idea. So now I'm going to open up my Word document. And here's my outline for this memo. So notice that the subject line has changed now to reflect what the topic actually is. So make sure you have your opening, your middle, and your closing. And notice that I've already outlined 3 body paragraphs here. So in your opening, you can go ahead and have a thesis. So again, I would recommend that you wait to write your thesis until after you've written the body, because then you know what you will want to introduce. It's a lot easier to introduce content that exists than trying to introduce content that doesn't yet exist. So remember that a thesis is simply a promise. This is what I'm going to prove. And so it should be your overall idea. And then your overall idea would then be broken down into 3 parts. So your thesis up here should contain, in one sentence, a thought from each of these topics. Okay. All right. So if you could surmise your entire memo in one sentence, that's what you're doing here. and try to make it specific. You wouldn't want to write a thesis that I could then attach to anyone else's memo, right? It should clearly match the content that comes next. All right, so you can clearly see that I have one paragraph on guiding, one paragraph on research, and one paragraph on Grice's Maxims. So remember our logos paragraph structure. So you're going to need a premise supported by sufficient evidence, and then draw it to a conclusion. And so remember that all of this is one paragraph. This is just one paragraph right here. And so my premise, remember from our earlier videos, is just an answer to a question. And so I find it useful to go ahead and write out the question I'm answering, so it makes it a lot easier to come up with my premise. So what does the challenge of guiding have to do with writing a business letter? And so what I would, an example might be when writing a business letter, I need to capture my reader's attention in the first sentence by explaining the purpose of the letter, and then make sure to relate each following paragraph to that purpose. Okay, so if you recall my video from 7083 on writing the letter report, that was one thing that you're supposed to do in a business letter format, is in your first sentence write your purpose for writing. And then logos tells us that we should then draw each paragraph back to that purpose. And so I could make this my premise, and then I would need to support that. So part of the evidence that I would include is what I just told you. So remember that evidence can include description, so you can describe what you have done in your 7083 letter. You can do a direct quote if you think how that sentence is said in particular is useful for your reader to see. And then in either case, explain the significance. So explain what is significant of what you described. Explain what is significant of what you quoted. Don't leave your reader guessing of why this is important. Okay, always explain to them what the point is. And then once you feel that you have enough evidence to sufficiently support your premise, okay, then draw it to a close. And remember that your concluding thought, this is just the last sentence of your body paragraph. You're answering the question, so what? Why does this matter? And so another way of thinking of this concluding thought is, what's at risk if I don't guide my reader? Okay, so that's what I want you to think about for each of these, is come up with an answer to the question, support it with evidence, and then come to a concluding thought, what's at risk if I don't guide my reader? And so another way to think of your thesis, or your closing paragraph even, you could put it in either place, is answering the overall question, what's at risk if I don't guide, research, and follow Grice's maxims? Okay, and so your thesis would answer the question why all three of these matter. Okay, and then you would break that up, address each point individually with sufficient evidence, and down here in your closing paragraph, so this would be your very last one, resolve any conflicts between the ideas, or if you don't see any conflicts between the ideas, between how you used to write and how these tips have changed how you write or would want to write now, okay? So the whole point of these reflection memos is to get you to evolve and change how you're thinking about your own writing. So that's what I'd like to see reflected in your closing paragraph. And your closing paragraph's endings should always be eventual. It should make sense why you are reflecting on why this is important here. It should make sense with what came before it. Okay. So just like a really good ending in a movie, it should be interesting, but it should be eventual in that it's clear that we were always leading towards that ending. Okay. So that is my last note on assignment 7057. I hope that this was useful, and if you have any questions about completing this assignment, I hope you'll bring them to our virtual classroom or send me an email. All right, good luck.